I'm hearing the English well. We're getting comments from our participants. So the platform having an issue uh, for interpretation to the public is not functioning. Okay, we will resolve that. Thank you, Katy, for your feedback.
Hey, Erica, so should I wait another minute or can I get started?
No, you can go.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you for the great introduction. Let me share my screen and hopefully you would all be seeing it in full screen right now. So thanks again for the introduction. As mentioned by Erica, I will start with some introduction on specific biosecurity measures for African swine fever. And then afterwards, I will introduce you, or hopefully it's not an introduction to all of you, to our biocheck system. So to start off, it will probably be a repetition, but then again, repetition is the main thing to get things to stuck. So as you all know, African swine fever is a viral disease caused by a double-stranded DNA virus. And normally it will only cause disease in pigs and wild birds. Although it is of a huge importance, still a lot of people tend to make a mistake here, but it is not a zoonosis, meaning that the virus will not cause a disease in humans. So for us, it is completely safe. But for both wild boars and domestic pigs, it can be a deadly disease, of course.
Nell,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We can see the presentation. You can share your screen. Now we can see it.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
I always forget there's an extra button in Zoom. I'm so sorry. Okay. So moving on. So yeah, as probably a lot of you also know that African swine fever has some different epidemiological cycles. And I'm actually not going into that because it's quite a complex situation where you have on the one hand side the natural reservoirs of the virus, which are wild pig species, the warthogs and the bush pig, and also a soft tick that is that acts as a vector for the virus. And in that way, it can transmit to domestic pigs, but those natural reservoirs are not even necessary at all the times. So, for example, in the most recent events in Europe, for example, the tick has no function whatsoever. So it is still possible that diseases are transmitted without those natural reservoirs. But of course, so our domestic pigs are involved, but also pig products, meat products. Also think about kitchen waste, sweet filling, and so on, swill feeding, and so on. And actually, a more recent discovery, well, not that recent anymore, but in comparison to the others, is that there also a huge influence from wild boar population and also the habitat that they live in. So it has to be sure that this disease is very complex. It has a lot of complex dynamics, and therefore it is that difficult to control. So as mentioned, there is a direct contact, or there is a direct, the easiest ways of transmission is through direct contact with excreta from different pig species. It can be blood, feces, saliva, and so on, but also, of course, the direct contact with infected animals as well. But we also have to think about indirect contacts. So meaning that the virus will not spread directly from one animal to another, but maybe a vehicle, equipment, clothing, and so on can be kind of a secondary step. Of course, as probably most of you also know, carcasses are a huge risk of transmission of the disease, mainly carcasses from wild boars, but also from domestic pigs, of course, and swill feeding is also something that I already mentioned. And then depending kind of on the country, the continent, we also have ticks and flies that have their part in the transmission. Problem is that the virus is very persistent, and that's one of the main reasons why new waves of African swine fever keep on coming up from time to time. And even more, or adhering to the importance of the disease, that is that there's not at the moment a cure or a vaccine that can protect the animals from the virus, and that is protective for all the different strains. Which makes that the disease of African swine fever poses high consequences for a country when there are infections. Now, maybe some of you have heard of a very promising candidate vaccine that is being developed, but at the moment they're still further investigating it. So maybe when we will do the series next year, there will be a vaccine. I don't know, but hopefully this can already help in trying to prevent this disease from spreading. So of course, the symptoms can be quite a wide range that are seen on the farms. Normally, we would say that the symptoms are very similar to classical swine fever, making it even more difficult to distinguish the different diseases. But we have strains that are very infectious, causing a high level of mortality in the animals. But you can also have strains that are mild, and some people can even have African swine fever but don't show any clinical symptoms. But typically some of the things that we tend to see is a high fever, weakness of the animals, a loss of appetite, abortion in our sows, and also the typical hemorrhagic lesions on the ears or in the abdomen or on the abdomens of the animals. Now, it's not the most updated chart that I'm just showing you, but just to give you an idea on the situation or the progression of African swine fever in Europe. It actually started, or it became quite endemic in Sardinia, which is on the lower left on your screen. So it's an island near Italy where it was actually present for a long period of time, already in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. But because it is an island, it could be isolated in there for a huge period of time. But then we also had infections in Russia, and actually from then onwards, it spread to the rest of Europe by 2014, more or less. And it kept on spreading from going from the east to the west side of Europe. And actually in 2019, so actually by the end of this small video, let's call it, a lot of different countries had positive cases of African swine fever. Think about Bulgaria, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, but also Belgium, where I'm from. And as mentioned, this spread was not mainly caused by the ticks, but more by our population of wild boars that is present in a lot of the countries. And I will come back to that in a minute, but also we as humans are actually one of the main reasons for the huge distance that the virus could spread over Europe. I'm not sure if you all know where Belgium is located, but it's actually a very tiny country, also on the left of your screen. And you see there's a limited amount of positive cases that were there in 2018. But it's clear that you see that in the center, like for example, Germany, for example, there were no cases at that time. So it's very curious that African swine fever could spread from all those countries in the east to, for example, Belgium, that is almost completely in the west. And the main explanation for that is that we as humans are actually one of the main causes for that transmission of disease through the transport of infected meat that could end up as kitchen leftovers in our and that we would give to our pigs subsequently. So indeed, in 2018, we had an outbreak in our wild boar population. Luckily, this happened near the south of our country, so the parts indicated in red, but it actually, of course, spread towards the north and the west of our country. but we were able to keep the virus within our wild boar population, because luckily we only have wild boars in the south of our country and not in the north. And also the north is the part where most of our domestic pigs are being held. So that was actually a bit of luck that we got. And actually that's also maybe one of the reasons why we could limit it to only to our wild boar population, so it never spread to our domestic pigs. Although we did, of course, lose our negative status for African swine fever in the wild boar population. And now, almost exactly 1 year ago, we again regained our negative status because we don't have any positive cases of African swine fever at the moment. So hopefully we can keep it like that. And one of the main reasons or one of the main actions that were performed in Belgium were thorough biosecurity measures. And before we can jump in onto specific recommendations regarding biosecurity measures for African swine fever, I want to cover the basics so we are on an equal level regarding what our interpretation is on biosecurity. And the way we like to define it is that biosecurity is a combination of all measures that can be taken to reduce the risk of introduction of diseases, but also the spread of diseases within a farm, within a certain region, a country, and so on. And we like to divide biosecurity, we like to divide biosecurity in two different parts, namely external and internal biosecurity. And by external biosecurity, we mean all the measures that can be taken to reduce the introduction of disease. So actually, this is the one that you want to focus on regarding African swine fever, or just in general to prevent diseases from coming into your country or your farm. And internal biosecurity then, on the other hand, is all measures that you can take to reduce the spread of a disease once it's already within your farm or maybe within your country. So it is our opinion, or you're convinced that biosecurity is or should be the basis of any disease control program, not only for African swine fever, but just for infectious diseases in general. Because having a decent biosecurity plan or program will prevent your animals from getting sick, and thus it will result in healthier animals. And as I already mentioned in the introduction, a huge part of our work is also concerning antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. And by having a decent biosecurity plan, preventive plan, we can also limit the use of antimicrobials. So although the focus of different biosecurity measures will depend a bit on the specific disease, so maybe in our case on African swine fever, there are some basic principles that apply to almost all situations and all diseases. And I will quickly go over them together with you guys. And the first one is actually the easiest one, saying that you should ideally separate your infected or diseased animals from your susceptible ones. And although this is a very basic principle and all people are aware of that, it's very important to include both direct contact, so prevent that a sick animal, a diseased animal can have physical contact with other animals, with susceptible ones, but also to prevent indirect contact. This is also one of the ways that African swine fever is spread. It's not directly from a sick pig to another pig that is healthy. It's also through clothing of farmers or visitors, of rodents, for example, but also trucks, materials, and so on. So it's very important to take these two into account. So as mentioned, you want to keep your infected or diseased animals as separate from your susceptible ones. But of course, as for example, a farmer, a veterinarian, a consultant, of course you need to visit your animals from time to time. You have to check on them. And that's when we say, whenever you need to cross that barrier, let's say, between those two types of animals, that you should take the necessary precautious measures to prevent transmission of disease. And the actions that you will need to take will, of course, depend on the situation, the disease, but what's very important is that these measures are performed in a consequent manner. Now, a second principle is stating that not all biosecurity measures are equally important. And based on a lot of research from a colleague, they came up with this kind of ranking from a low transmission risk to a high transmission risk. And in general, so I'm not saying that this is the case for African swine fever, in general, for example, our breeding or the feed poses a lower risk for transmission of disease than, for example, drinking water or visitors that come to the farm. And of course, completely on the right of the figure, direct contact between live animals is the most efficient way of transmitting diseases. So just to keep into account that not all diseases or not all measures will have the same effect. And then the third principle is that biosecurity actually is not a black and white story, meaning that each measure that you will take can help to improve or help to reduce the risk of introduction and spread. And in the end, for most diseases, it's not possible to completely eradicate them, but nonetheless, it's very important to reduce the infection pressure as much as possible. And that's why we also always say that stables, materials should be cleaned and disinfected, because your goal is to have your infection pressure or the load of pathogens that is present within a stable or on material, on clothing, to keep it as low as possible, so the immunity of your animal can withstand the infection, that your animal is able to combat, to fight a specific disease or infection. And then a fourth principle is that the size does matter. In the case that we're giving trainings in an interactive way, I would now ask you which would be the goal that you would preferably would like to defend. And normally, everyone would say that it is the goal on the left, because it's the smallest, so it is way easier to get soccer balls out of the goal on the left than it is on the goal on the right. And it's actually kind of the same idea with biosecurity on a certain farm as well. Because the bigger a farm is getting, the more difficult it is to keep infections out. And there are multiple reasons for that. For starters, on a big farm, there's much more movement going on. We have more often animals coming in or going out, also movement of feed, of manure, of carcasses, and often there's always also more interaction or more introduction of visitors. Veterinarian is more often needed on the farm, but also all types of technical people, personnel, and so on. So that's why the risk of introduction of a disease is bigger in general on a bigger farm as well. Often there's also more animals on there, so whenever there is a certain infection or a positive animal for a disease, there's also a higher risk of spreading the disease. And of course, another reason is that it's not always the case, but often the high producing farms are also the bigger ones. And animals that put a lot of energy in, for example, gaining weight and producing milk or meat or whatsoever, they put a lot of energy in growing or producing, meaning that they have less energy to combat an infection. And in general, very high producing animals are more susceptible to an infection than others. So that's why, again, bigger farms tend to have a higher risk, but I have never said that biosecurity should not be important in a small farm as well. So it is important in any type of animal production farm, of course. And then the fifth and final principle is that you saw at the second principle that some measures, some actions don't pose the highest risk. For example, remember the feed at principle 2. It was more on the left of the image, indicating that it poses a lower risk for transmitting disease. Well, this fifth principle is actually saying that if a certain action that has a low chance of transmitting diseases is occurring at a very high range or at a very high frequency, that it can become a higher risk or a bigger risk for infection. So that's why all the actions occurring on a farm, all things that are going on a daily basis should never be overlooked. So everything could have as an impact on a certain disease transmission. So now to put that really just as that was a kind of an introduction for the basic principles, but if we're really looking into African swine fever, there are a short list of things that are more important in the case of this virus being present on your farm. And biosecurity is, as I already mentioned, actually one of the most important tools in preventing African swine fever, as at the moment there is no vaccine or no preventive drug or no cure whatsoever. So first thing that we like to advise or emphasize is that you should buy in animals as little as possible. So especially in pig production, it's one of the only animal production brands, let's say, where you could, if you want, just produce in a closed circuit system. So it is possible. I'm not sure how often it's occurring in your country, but in Belgium, for example, a lot of our farms are working in a closed circuit, meaning that they never buy in animals. They only breed their own sows, their own new gilts, so there's no need to buy in new animals. The only thing they do from time to time is buy semen for fertilization, of course. But that's actually one of the most ideal scenarios, because if you're not buying in animals, you don't have the chance that new animals can introduce a disease on your farm. So in the case of African swine fever, it is possible that if you're buying animals, that those animals have a subclinical infection with African swine fever, and that way you will introduce it to your farm. So whenever you're not in the possibility to eliminate that part, so you need to buy animals, make sure that they come from a safe source and that you know that the source herd of the pigs has certification or declarations that they are free of African swine fever. So in that sense, the quarantine unit, the quarantine area and period is of high importance. So here you can put your animals and give it time to detect whether they are completely healthy or not. Also in the quarantine period, you can test your animals for, in this case, having African swine fever, maybe in a subclinical form. So it is of the highest importance that you know that your animals are completely healthy before you introduce them to your herd. The same applies actually for semen, and I am not an expert in African swine fever, I am in biosecurity, but from my knowledge, it's still not completely clear where African swine fever can spread through the reproductive parts. What is certain, however, is that they have found viruses or African swine virus particles within a lot of body fluids, also including semen. So that's why also for the case of semen as well, it is very important to only buy it from an origin where you know for sure that it has been tested and it is negative for African swine fever virus. A second one is to limit the number of visitors that are coming to your farm as much as possible. As indicated, humans can be a major contributor to the transmission of African swine fever. So therefore, try to limit the amount of people that are coming to your farm, and especially those that need to come into contact with your animals. So whenever people need to be in there, for example, the veterinarian or a technician, they should at least follow the measures depicted on your screen. So it's important to use clean and disinfected boots that are specific to the farm. And also that farm-specific clothes or coveralls are also worn whenever people have access to the animal facilities. And then thirdly, also washing hands and putting on gloves is very important before people can come into contact with your animals. So it's already starting from the first phase, let's say, and that is that to keep unwanted people out as much as possible. So therefore, we always advise that people completely close off their farm if possible with these kind of fences, for example. And also important, definitely in the case of epidemic and endemic diseases, is to register all the people that are coming to your farm, to keep a logbook of all people that came to your farm for whenever there should be an outbreak of African swine fever, that you can retrace those people and contact them if necessary. So as mentioned, people should, as a basis, is very basic biosecurity, wash their hands and change into farm-specific clothing and coverall. And then a third one is to be very careful about transport of animals and goods. As already mentioned with the principles, and also it's also part of the African swine fever epidemiology of the disease, that is that transmission of the disease can occur through indirect contact, through trucks, through material, equipment, and so on. So therefore, it's very important to make sure that trucks are, one, completely cleaned and disinfected before they would load animals that need to come to your farm, but also the other way around. If you have pigs that need to go to the slaughterhouse, they should be picked up by a truck that is completely cleaned and disinfected, and that's also empty. So there should not be a pig on there from another farm, for example. Also important, as these trucks go from farm to farm, it's important to keep them away from your stables containing your animals as much as possible. And then thirdly, truck drivers, they have no reason to enter your farm facilities. So make also sure that they stay inside the truck or they stay outside and never come into contact with the inside of your farm premises. So this, just an example of a truck. It is a rendering truck in this case, because I'm not sure about the habits in your country, but in Belgium, in Europe, we tend to have an off-site processing plant for carcasses. So dead animals are removed from the farm and are processed somewhere else. And of course, these kind of trucks that are picking up carcasses, they can pose a very high risk of introduction of disease. Not only African swine fever, of course, but all types of diseases. So ideally, they should be kept away as far as possible. Same with manure, ideally, you have your own specific material. And this just as a reminder that whatever way you're using to dispose of carcasses, most people have some type of storage to keep them in, and there it's very important to have it completely closed off for vermin, wild animals, and so on, because otherwise they can, of course, spread the disease or virus particles as well. And also important to have them easy to clean and disinfect. Then a fourth one is, of course, our wild boars are a very very important part of the disease cycle. So whenever you live in a region where there are wild boars, it's very important to have a farm that is well fenced, not only the part where your domestic pigs are living outside, but also especially places of your farm that are storing the feed, for example. Because if wild boars would come into contact with the feed, they can again indirectly spread the virus through that way, if afterwards you're giving that feed to your domestic animals. As mentioned, you have your ticks, but also flies or kinds of pests can be a vector for diseases for African swine fever. So a very decent pest control program is very important. And also, although it is very nice to have company in the stables, we strongly advise not to have dogs or cats inside the animal facilities. So very important to keep all types of openings in the animal houses to keep them closed with kinds of nets, so no wild animals can have access to the farm premises. Another advice to keep especially rats and mice out of the animal stables is to keep the area around the houses, around the stables, as clean as possible, so they don't have an area for hiding and they have lesser intention of coming into your animal facilities. And then a sixth step is, or sixth recommendation is to avoid all contact with wild boars. And here we specifically mean contact as you as a human, as for example hunters that might come into contact with, well, still live boars, or after hunting the dead animals, and they also should be removed from all local grounds. So this is actually one of the main reasons why there could be a spread of African swine fever also in Belgium, because there were still a lot of carcasses of wild boars present in their natural habitat, and the virus particles, the African swine fever particles, can easily persist in the environment for months and months, even if the animal has already been deceased. So that's why diseased animals should be removed as much as possible. And also when you would have contact with wild or dead animals, with wild pigs, you should, very importantly, never come into contact with domestic pigs. And first of all, completely change clothes, footwear, and so on. This was also mentioned in the beginning with the transmission of African swine fever, and that is to never feed your pigs with leftovers or swill feeding. Because again, this could originate from contaminated food or contaminated pork and meat products. So it's never a good idea to give that to your domestic pig. And then a final recommendation is, of course, whenever there are any kind of suspicious symptoms that you would find in your domestic animals, being the fever, the lethargic, and so on, that you should call your local veterinarian immediately so they can test whether an animal is positive for African swine fever or not. So that's it for my recommendation or recommendations for African swine fever and the prevention of it. And normally, Erica told me that I can just go on with my next presentation. So first, have a look at the second one and share that one again. Now, hopefully correctly from the first time. Okay. So with everything just being said, regarding biosecurity, this is actually a topic that we have been working on for several years. And although a lot of people are quite familiar with some type of biosecurity measures, and the principles will not sound as exotic to probably a lot of people, in the past there was actually no way to really measure biosecurity actions, biosecurity measures in an objective way. So there was no tool available to quantify biosecurity. And that's actually why our biocheck tool, the one that I will present to you now, is or was developed to quantify biosecurity measures in an objective way with a lot of scientific knowledge in the back of our head. So it is a scoring system for measuring biosecurity on farm level, and we have it for different animal species. We have it for pigs, but also for poultry and cattle in different languages. And very important for those of you who are interested is that the tool is freely available on our website. So for everyone that is interested to know how your farm or your client's farm are doing regarding biosecurity and their biosecurity level, you can just access the website. It's fairly straightforward, and choose, in the case of African swine fever, of course, the pig survey, and you can get started. Now, we have the tool for over 10 years now. It was completely renewed a couple of times, but in total, we have it for over 10 years. And in the meanwhile, we have over 30,000 entries worldwide in more than 70 countries. which actually makes that we have the largest database on biosecurity measures in animal production today. And you see here the numbers, I added them a couple of days ago, so normally they should have increased by now again, but you see that the highest numbers are there for pig production, just normally because we have the pig survey was the first one that was developed, and then afterwards came the poultry and the cattle one. So in the case of African swine fever, it's very good that we have the biggest database is the one for pig production. So as mentioned, the tool can measure biosecurity on a farm level, but it can do more than that. When you would perform the survey or an audit on different farms, you can compare these farms with each other because you have a tool, an objective measurement to compare two farms with each other. And also, as we have this huge database, you can also compare your farm or the farm of your client with farms from other countries. And of course, for follow-up, which is often the case because I haven't mentioned it, but the tool was intentionally made for academic purposes initially. So we had a lot of research going on in biosecurity and we wanted to quantify it. So it was built for an academic purpose, but now we provide it to everyone who is interested. But a lot of the times you are interested in long-term follow-up, especially in intervention studies, for example. Well, by having a dedicated tool, you can, for example, perform a biosecurity audit today, and in a couple of months, you can do it again and see where things have changed over time. And the biocheck system is also based, as mentioned, on a lot of scientific knowledge, not only from us, but from a lot of our colleagues in Belgium, but also in different European countries. And it takes different risks into account. Because what do we mean by that? We say biocheck is a risk-based scoring system. Because in the back of the survey, we have this figure that we just saw in my previous presentation, where we said that not all transmission routes are equally important. This information and a lot more, of course, is included in the back of the survey. So practically, what does this mean? If you have a survey with, for example, 100 questions, not each question is scored 1 or 0. For example, if you're doing the correct biosecurity measures, you get a 1 out of 1. And if you don't do it, you get a 0. And then in the end, you can ideally have 100%. Well, it's not built like that because we know that, as already mentioned, for example, direct contact between live animals poses the highest risk of transmission. So that's why, for example, questions regarding the contact of your domestic animals with wild animals, for example, it will have a higher influence on the net result than, for example, the measures you take concerning the feed that is coming into your farm. So just as a background information for you guys. And it also includes a lot of, as mentioned, direct, indirect contacts. Actually, everything that we know about biosecurity is in there in the back, but you will, as a user, you will never see it, of course. So the way we work is that users, people, whoever are interested in using the tool, they will access the survey, enter or answer the specific questions, and they will get a scoring in return, which you then can use for coaching, for feedback, for whatever reason, depending on your job, probably. So basically, if we're always talking about biocheck and the scoring system, we're talking about the different surveys that we have. And as mentioned, we have it for different animal species in different languages, and it is divided into topics regarding external and internal biosecurity. And within those two different subsections, we have, again, different subcategories. Think about feed and water, for example, carcass management, and so on. And the way it's built is that each of these different subcategories can have 2 to up to a couple of questions. And this makes that we end up for pig, for example, if I'm not mistaken, we have around 120 questions, which might seem as a lot, but it is covering all the most important aspects concerning biosecurity. And for those of you who are thinking, I might be interested in using this survey in having an idea on the situation on my farm or in my country or with my clients, and who are a bit discouraged by the amount of questions that I just mentioned, you will notice that a lot of the questions are just simply a yes or no. So it doesn't need you to take a lot of time to go through the entire survey. And of course, the more you use it, the faster you will get at it. So as mentioned, when people or when you maybe as a user will fill in all the different questions, you will get a report, and it will show it in big screen so it's more clear. And what you will see is that you will get the first column are the different subcategories. The second one are the scores for your specific farm or the farm of your clients, the farm where you just did the audit. And for the different subcategories, you will see the score, and in the end, you will get a subtotal for external biosecurity, which you see on the left and the bottom left for external biosecurity, and then on the right, you see all the scores for internal biosecurity, and in the end, again, a subtotal for internal biosecurity, and also a total covering the entire farm. And then on the third column, you see there's a country average. We can provide this as a type of benchmark if you want, whenever you are filling in a survey for a country where we have 4 or more entries. If you're living, for example, in Belgium, I know for sure we have over 40 entries, so you will get a country average. If you're living in South America, for example, then we know for some countries we will have 40 entries, for some we don't. So it is possible that the country average will not be available for your specific country. But then again, this should be a motivation to give or to provide or to do more biosecurity audits to improve that number, so you can also have a country average. And then the last column is a world average, which is always in the report, where you can compare the specific farm where you did the audit with other, in our case, pig farms that are in our database. And the way you can use the report is by just having a look at it, and what you will immediately see is that some scores are appearing in red, meaning that this specific farm is scoring below the average. And this is just basic as a report that you would get in school. And this will help you to set priorities and to see which points, which subcategories are in need of more attention. So this table is included in the report, as well as these kind of spider plots, which are actually a visual representation of the previous information. On the different axes, you see again the different subcategories. They're indicated with specific letters. And the idea here is that the bigger the blue area is, or whenever the blue area is bigger than the purple one, it's indicating that this specific farm is doing better than the average. So ideally, you will have the biggest area of blue as possible. So this is just another way of interpreting the results, because we know some people prefer the visual type and other people prefer the table with the numbers. So the scoring system is actually a way to, as mentioned, quantify the biosecurity. And I believe the strong points are that it makes it so easy to see on which specific topics more attention should be paid. So the topics, the subcategories in red are the ones that you ideally, as an advisor or maybe as a farmer yourself, you want to put more attention, because there you are at risk maybe of getting an infection by not improving those specific topics. So especially in farms and countries that are improving their biosecurity status in general. These kinds of tools can help to set priorities, because of course it's not possible to change everything within a day, within a month, even within years. So it's just a helpful tool to decide on what you should focus on first and in the future. And also, of course, because you can use it over and over again, it's an easy way to monitor the biosecurity status and to see where it has improved over time. So very practically, the way we use it, or we advise people to use it, is to do it in the following order. Of course, it sounds very stupid that you should make an appointment. But we know this from quite some people, that especially if you're, for example, the herd veterinarian of a specific farm, that you can just go to a farm and try or do the audit, the biosecurity audit. But we found that it's very important to mention this to the farmer, to emphasize and to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because I'm not sure, of course, on different cultural interpretations, but we in Belgium, if someone is coming to your farm and they're doing an audit, even if that's your farm veterinarian, which you know very well, we kind of get a bit annoyed if you don't know what they're doing. Because if you have the idea that we will be scored or we'll be evaluated, we tend to maybe think that things are better than the way they actually are. So we try to, or we tend to get a better representation of what the farm actually is. So therefore, it's very important to clearly indicate what you're doing and why you're doing it, and also to emphasize the benefits for yourself doing the audit, but also for the farmer. So be as open as possible and make sure that you have the trust of the farmer, so they will also answer to all specific questions as honest as possible. And then, of course, you will perform the audit, but it is important to really go to the farm. I know it's a difficulty with a lot of diseases going on, and also with COVID, of course. But some people tend to ask us whether it's possible to use the tool through a telephonic interview, for example. And of course, it is possible, but we kind of advise against it, because especially if you're not familiar with a specific farm, you, as mentioned, farmers or the responsible persons of the farm will maybe give a representation of the farm that is not completely honest. And not because they're not being honest, it's just that for some things, some questions, for example, do you always change your coverall when you go to the animals? Maybe they do it from time to time or often, but not always. So depending on the character of your farmer, on the way they interpreted that, they will give you a yes or no answer. And if you will go to the farm and get a look around, you will be able to answer already quite a lot of the questions in the survey without needing to ask the farmer. So you will get the best representation of the farm the way it really is, because that will help yourself, but also the farmer. So it has no use whatsoever to fill in things that are not completely correct or not a good representation, because then you will just be fooling yourself and the farmer, and they cannot learn anything from it as well. So that's why we strongly advise to take the survey with you, preferably on paper, to print it out, and to go through it with the farmer after you have done a complete tour in the farm. One of the other things, for example, and especially in pig production with it, which is also a reason why you should do a farm visit, is that one of the questions will ask you about the daily route that the farmer or the responsible person takes to do all his or her job. So it's important to ask the farmer to just do a tour to guide you through the farm he or she would normally do, and not take the most convenient way or the shortest way, or the way that you don't need to change your coverall and boots 5 times. No, it's very important to see the situation as it truly is. especially in pig production, because we have all these different age groups in there. So as said, preferably we advise you to use the tool on paper and then afterwards fill it in online on your computer, on your smartphone, which might seem like a bit of doing the same job twice. But if you would use it, or maybe people in the audience who have been using the tool before, you know that it can be, when you're doing an interview or you're going inside the farm, you will see all kinds of different things. And it is possible that you can answer, for example, question 11 of the survey and question 60 within the same minute. So, and this is not so easy in an online version. Then you need to go back to the next page or go switch back. And on online, on a phone or PC, it's not that easy. So that's we still advise to use a paper. You can easily switch in between questions, but also you can make notes. Especially if you're doubting about a certain answer, you can just write it down and maybe come back to it later when you're just at ease at the at the table with your farmer having a coffee or whatever. So that's why we advise on that, because that will give you the best representation and the best audit as possible. And then, of course, after you have filled in all the different questions, you will get a report, which you can use depending on your interest, of course, to generate a specific type of advice. And important there is not to stop there, not to just generate a report, maybe generate advice and then send it through email to the farmer, or go there and hand it to them on paper and just stop there. It's very important, if you want to improve biosecurity, to re-evaluate and to do follow-up visits. It's very much a thing, and I haven't emphasized that, but biosecurity is not only taking different actions, it's also an attitude. And it's something that I've been working on for years and years during my PhD as well, to get people to understand the importance and to start making changes. Because depending on the farm, on the farmer, their ambitions whatsoever, some people will start making new arrangements, making actions immediately, and other people will take time. And nonetheless, for each type of farmer, you will need to take your time and make sure that you're repeating the same thing over and over again, especially if you have farmers or responsible persons who are doing a certain action for years and years. If you have a habit of performing, or maybe, I'm not sure, having breakfast the same way for 5 or 10 years, it's very difficult to change that, because a person has just come once to your house, told you, nah, your breakfast is not that healthy, maybe you should change to that. It's the same idea. You cannot immediately expect people to start changing from day one. And it's very important when they are in the process of changing even the smallest things, that you are repeating it over and over again. Because if you would just leave them be, chances are very high that they will go back to their old habits, because it's normal. We are humans and we tend to go back to our previous habits. So therefore, we advise do follow-up visits, ideally between 6 to 12 months, because you need to give your farmer, your responsible person, time to make changes, but not enough time for them to forget that you have discussed certain aspects. So make sure you do follow up and that you are motivating and that you are positive about even the smallest things that they are changing, because every small improvement is already a big step. And then to finalize, I really just want to mention the technique that we are using. So the check, improve, reduce, where we say do, first of all, a measuring of the biosecurity. So use our biocheck to have an idea about the biosecurity situation in your specific farm or in that of one of your clients. and then try to improve it by having your results in there, by using the reports and so on. And by improving biosecurity levels, you can, in our case, limit the introduction of African swine fever, but you'll also have lesser chance of animal getting sick in general, having reduced need for antimicrobials, and so on. But a thorough evaluation is needed before you can start improving. And it's very important to tailor your advice to the specific farm. If, for example, you have done a biosecurity plan in one of your clients, you cannot just easily copy paste it into the next farm, because it will really depend on the situation, the farmer, and so on. And then also very important is to write it down, because if you have a paper version, an email, whatever, with the specific plans and the goals that are set, it's also easier for people to adhere to it. People found it more confronting if they have something on paper and something is written down. Then for sure it was an agreement if it was written down. And make sure you have goals both in the short term but in the long term. So both things that can be easily changed on the farm, but also things that you can work on in the next couple of months or even years. And for those of you who are maybe already in their daily job working with biosecurity, trying to improve that on your own farm and your client's farm, we have all different kinds of products apart from our survey itself. So please, for those of you who are interested or you want further details, you can contact me or the team through our credentials that are depicted here. So with that, I would really like to thank you for the attention, and guess I'm going back to Erica now.
Muchísimas gracias, doctora Nel, por esta excelente presentación. La verdad es que fue muy enriquecedor todo lo que usted nos dio. Bueno, solo quiero recordarle.
All I want to do, thank you so much for your participation, Dr. Nelly. I just want to remind all the participants that they can write their questions and their comments in the question and answer section, or they can also do it in the chat. Also for social networks, you could post your questions in the chat. Then for the French channel, that we're having a few issues to file their registration online, that has been sorted out. So you can please go ahead with your registration so that we can send you the material of this excellent presentation that Dr. Nell gave us. I want to take the opportunity and introduce you Eric Etter, Dr. Eric Etter. He is a veterinary epidemiologist who is currently Secretary of CaribVET and member of CIDAT. He is an extraordinary teacher in the Pretoria, South Africa University, and he is a well-known international expert in terms of risk analysis. He has published more than 60 he has more than 60 publications in international networks. So please go ahead with your presentation, Eric.
Yes, thank you very much, Erica, for this very kind presentation. And I will just start sharing my screen. Okay. So, as Nell presented here, will be another tool that we wanted to present you. We discussed that with the coordination team of this interagency group, and because it has been developed quite recently, we thought it was also useful to present it to you, even if it's not exactly the same tool and the same purpose, I guess, that the one we have been presented just now. So this one is a web tool, should be seen more as an help and to assess your risk of introducing ASF into your farm. So in terms of biosecurity, you see we are at the first level. There's one of introduction, not the one for spread into the farm. And this tool will help you to highlight the potential risk areas on your farm and propose some potential improvements. Even if these propositions are very limited in fact, and it's also a questionnaire based with 35 questions divided in 6 sections. But I wanted to warn you, and this is a warning that is given by the tool itself. So this tool does not replace a comprehensive assessment of the specific biosecurity risk, and does not replace the advice of a veterinarian or health authorities. And before presenting the tools, I just want to mention to all of you that I have no interest with Boehringer Ingelheim. It's just because this tool is available freely available on the web, and also as a phone app that you can download for your phone, either on the Google Play or on the App Stores, Apple Store. So it's not because we've got interest in this tool that we presented it, but rather because it should help you in a first attempt to have an idea about your level of biosecurity regarding introduction of ASF, the risk of introduction of ASF in your farm. So the tool is really dedicated to farmers rather than to state vets or veterinarian, even if it can be used by them as also an help just for starting discussion with pig farmers. So you've seen here the different link to download the app, or to get directly to the tool on the web, and we will share this link again with you in the chat. And when what I will present you is the tool from the website. So when you get onto this website, you will see this screen. So the tool is called ASF Combat. You can choose between lots of different languages. So obviously for this presentation, I choose English, but you can have it in French, in Spanish, in Netherlands, etc. Not in Portuguese. I was just checking. I don't see it in Portuguese. But anyway, so you will start by choosing your language, and then you just proceed, and you will have to start by explaining the type of farm you have, so, and the size of your farm and where you are located. So regarding the type of farm, you've got a list where you can choose the type of farm that you are owning. You've got this full list. So obviously, once again, is not completely dedicated to small farm. Just backyard farms are not mentioned in it, but in any way, you can just choose one of them and just proceed by choosing then the size of your farm and your country. Once that has been done, you will see this 6 section in which of them you will have a list of questions you will have to complete. And after each section, you will have a sort of a picture of your risk level, and also some advice if necessary in terms of biosecurity regarding some strategic points where your answer showed that you are at risk in your farm. So I just, for this presentation, followed an example that is a completely fictive example, but just to show you how it works. So the first, so you've seen the six section, animals, transport, management, people, feeding, and location. In the first section, you have to fill 4 questions. So about introduction of animal in your farm, the first one. The second one is about the frequency of the introduction in the farms. And the third question about breeding methods, and about also some management, biosecurity management you could have, such as quarantine for the fourth question. So in this example, I feel you see answering, yes, we are bringing animals in the farms every 7 to 30 days apart, and in terms of breeding, we are using internal artificial insemination or boars on site, and we have a quarantine between 7 and 30 days. So once answered, you proceed and you get this type of screen with your level of risk, your answer, and obviously the optimal one, which for example, in the first question, as mentioned previously by Nell, it's better not bringing any animals in your farms because it is the highest risk of introducing the disease, particularly African swine fever. So, and you see that you don't have the optimal answer because, so you've got a reason, because ASF spreads by direct contact. Obviously, we know that it's not only the only way of spreading, but it is one of the ways. So that's why your answer is not the optimal one. Frequent are swine deliveries to the farms. So once again, because you mentioned that it's between 7 and 30, you don't have the optimal answer because less pig introduction means less risk. So you see a little bit this type of explanation. So it's not very developed, and that's why it's always good to have the advice of a veterinarian or official of animal health in order to go a little bit further in the explanation. Regarding the third question, what is your breeding methods? So internal artificial insemination or boars on site, and obviously the optimal answer would have been no semen used on this site, because ASF can stay infective in contaminated semen. If using artificial insemination, semen should originate from a guaranteed ASF negative source. So here it's a little bit more developed as a reason. And for the fourth question about the quarantine, the optimal answer would have been closed herd, no pigs brought into the herd. And because once again, it's a little bit as for the first question, ASF spread by direct contact and live animals can carry the virus. And then you just proceed and continue to the second section about transport. And now you've got 6 questions. regarding the transport, where you can see that for the first one, the level of flow restriction on the vehicle used to transport animal to market, the collection. Second one about the washing frequency of the vehicles that are used to transport animals. The third question is about using disinfectant or not. And the fourth one is about applying drying time after washing. Then you've got a question about the animal load out area in your farm, and about the last question is about biosecurity policy for the flow of feed vehicle. So here again, I made an example by choosing some of the answer, and sorry. And here is the evaluation, the assessment of the level of risk for my fictive farm. And once again, you see the question, your answer, and how should be the optimal answer. So for vehicles, the explanation, vehicles are dedicated to this site and are not used in other sites, which avoid any introduction of the virus through some grounds that could be infected sites. Here, for the second question, we had obviously the right and for the third one, there is also our answer was the right one, so we don't have explanations. For the first one, we didn't. We had also the optimal answer, but there is a little bit of explanation about ASF virus being highly resistant to low temperature, and heat at 56 degrees for 70 minutes or above 60 for 20 minutes destroys ASF. So you see, all these reasons are based on scientific knowledge, and you've got a little bit of this explanation. For the fifth question, the reason is animal transportation should get away from the farm because you should avoid any direct contact with the external driver and vehicle. So always about the risk of introduction through also people and through fomites. If we proceed with the third section about management, once again, you will have several questions, 7 questions. So the first one regarding the disposition of carcasses of dead pigs, how frequently these carcasses are collected from your farm, does your farm have secure perimeter fence, about also the way you are dealing with rodents in your the possibility of having birds accessing your pig housing, access for other animals such as dogs or cats, and what is your access to veterinary advice. So if we choose some of these answer, once again, you just proceed and you obtain your level of risk. So for the first question, I have answered that we are disposing carcasses off-site, rendering with collection directly at the farm's dead box less than 500 meters from buildings. And the optimal answer should have been on-site with incineration, burial, or composting. And the reason why we had a high risk in our answer, which you see also the color that indicates also your level of risk for each question, is that disposal of carcasses should be either on site or more than 1 kilometer away in a secure setup. So for the second question, we had the optimal answer, and there was also some explanation about this question. Rangering truck can carry infective virus from one site to another, as we've seen with Nell. The third question, secure perimeter fence. You see that this fence will keep wild boar and feral pigs away from your farm. So obviously, you need also to discuss all this answer on all these questions, as explained before, with some biosecurity professionals such as veterinarian, because sometimes in your country you don't have, for example, in some of islands, some of the Caribbean, you don't have wild boars in your territory, so obviously it's not a very pertinent question. So that's why you have to replace all this questionnaire in your particular environment. Regarding the fourth question is and the fourth, fifth, and sixth question it's about possibility of having some mechanical vectors such as rodent, birds, cat, dogs. There is nothing about flies, but if you remember, it was mentioned also by Nell that flies, and it has been shown scientifically that flies could also act as mechanical vectors. So perhaps we should also add a question in this questionnaire regarding the prevention of flies in your houses where you keep your pigs. And regarding access to veterinary advice, obviously, professional biosecurity training should be mandatory for all farm personnel. So now we will jump to the section regarding people. So if you employ people in your farm, so once again, this has to be adapted to your local condition. The first question is how long the downtime period is required for visitors, including veterinarians. Second one is about how our farm entrance designed. Do you have biosecurity protocols? Do farm personnel travel to ASF risk areas? Do employees or farm workers keep other pigs where they are living, or in another place than where they are working? The fifth question is, do you or your staff employees go hunting? So once again, it's regarding the risk of bringing virus from wild boar or feral pigs. And the seventh question was about having employees or farm workers allowed to bring food of pork origin into the farm, because as I mentioned, the virus is very resistant, and you can have it in pork. And if you bring it into the farm, this is also a way of introducing the virus. So once again, I just answer some of the question, and then we get this type of level of risk. And with development of the reason for each of the question when it was required. So for the first one, the explanation of the visitors, if visitors are allowed into the farm, they should respect a downtime of at least 1 night or 5 nights coming from an ASF restricted area. If we jump to the fourth question, then we have an explanation about farm personnel should not travel to ASF risk or respect a downtime of 5 days before returning to the farm. So I don't really know where these 5 days are coming from, because we know that the virus is highly resistant in the environment. And if you don't, for example, if you are using boots, and these boots, you walk in an area contaminated with fluids from pigs that died from ASF. The virus could survive a little bit longer than 5 days. So once again, you see that some of this question, you should also discuss that with your veterinarians. The fifth question, having other pigs for your employees in the farms. So obviously, this increases the risk of ASF introduction. Same thing with hunting wild boars or feral pigs. And regarding the bringing food of pork origin, as mentioned, this virus can stay infected for several months in sausages, frozen, on processed meat of pork. So these are the explanation for this one. So regarding people, next section is about feeding. So you've got here 4 questions. So do you import complete feed or feed ingredients from ASF positive areas? Obviously, you see already where the risk can come from. Are feed ingredients of pork origin used in ration diets fed on your farm? Do you do any swill feedings? Are pigs fed with kitchen scraps, catering waste, or food leftovers? This could apply particularly in case of backyard farming, but not only. And where do you get your drinking water supply from? So here I choose also some of the question. Obviously, some of them I did on purpose to have a high risk. Do you import complete feed might be used in diet? ASF can stay infected in product of swine or pork origin. Are feed ingredients of pork origin used in ration diet fed on your farm? So in that case, it's because the pork products can carry this infectious ASF virus for very long time, months. So it's a little bit the same as we've seen previously. And also the same for using of swills. Regarding this use of swill, I know that obviously the optimal answer is not using swills, but there are lots of countries where people are doing swill feedings, even if it's, for example, forbidden. I have in mind the case of South Africa. And the problem is that it's very complicated to check each farms, particularly these small farms or backyard farming that you can have. And these people, most of the time, these people having backyard pigs, they have these pigs because it's a way of improving their livelihood, and because they've got low incomes, and using pigs is a way also of using this kitchen waste or spills, so feeding animals with at a very low cost, and therefore sometimes, I say sometimes, it could be also appropriate instead of making this activities as forbidden. It should be explained to people how to treat also the swills, explaining them what we've seen just previously about boiling these swills during a certain period of times, that will avoid the virus to survive. So obviously it's not the optimal answer that, that they are using swills, but in case you can't avoid it, it's better also to explain people that there are also ways of avoiding the risk of introducing the virus through the swills if you correctly treat them. So I know this question is very, very tight and is very concerning for people, but we discuss a lot about it, particularly with a colleague of mine, Marie-Lou Penrith, that is an African swine fever expert, recognized all over the world, and she really agreed about this vision of explaining people that sometimes it's better to explain people how to treat these swills instead of just making them doing forbidden things, but they will do it anyway because they have no way of avoiding it. Regarding water supply, it's also regarding the issue of
también con respecto al suministro, lidiamos con la contaminación de ríos, de lagos, y el virus puede sobrevivir también en los cadáveres por mucho tiempo y por ende infectar a los cerdos. Entonces, la última sección se trata de la ubicación. ¿Qué tipo de finca tiene usted? ¿O qué tipo de producción porcina está? ¿Qué tipo? La finca se encuentra a 5 kilómetros o qué tipos de finca se ubican a 5 kilómetros de su finca.
Perdón la interrupción, Thais, por favor cambia el canal español.
And the presence of wild boar or feral pigs in your area. So once again, you can answer according to your situation, and you will have here for the choice I've made. You will have also again this type of answer of assessment of your answer, and you will have explanation. So once again, indoor pigs are less likely to accidentally come in contact with wild boar, feral pigs. The longer the distance between farms, the better, etc. The longer the distance to shelter plants and collection points, the better. And same with public roads, with intensive transportation, and also the role of wild boars in the circulation of the ASF virus. So once you've done all this, answer all these questions, you manage to have all this assessment for this different section. And obviously, you will proceed and you will obtain the complete level of risk for your farm with a highlight of each of these different sections. So here on the top, you've got the global risk for your farm and the level for each of the sections. So as mentioned by Neil, it's a little bit something that is not the end of your assessment, because it's just the beginning. In fact, it's where you find this section that are the highest at risk. This is where you need to start managing your risk and taking decision in order to decrease a little to decrease the level of risk for each of these sections. So in our example, it was the section of management on feeding that were showing the highest level of risk. So now what you need to do is to go back to this section and see what you were doing and what was the reason why you had the highest level of risk in this section, and to see if you can do something in order to decrease your level of risk. So once again, this tool that I just presented to you now is just a first step in the assessment of biosecurity in your farm, and it's as mentioned also, it should not avoid discussion with biosecurity professional, discussion with your veterinarian, in order to go a little bit further and to take decision in terms of action in order to mitigate the risk of ASF introduction in your farm. So I'm done with this presentation of a second tool, which is not as complete as the one presented by Neil, because it's only dedicated to introduction of ASF virus in your farm. But I think it's a very easy way of having a first assessment at the farm level. So back to you, Erika.
Muchas gracias, Eric. Excelente.
Thank you so much, Eric. Excellent presentation. And it was great to complement it with Dr. Nell's presentation. Truly interesting, everything that you have been able to present today. Hope that all the countries that are with us today can take advantage of all of this information. Now remember, this series of webinars are all going to be posted on IICA's social media. And you can distribute them to your contacts. And hopefully a lot of people will be able to speak about it, to address it. And it could be people as with simple farms, with backyard animals, but we brought this for you to make it helpful and prepare Latin America and the Caribbean to face African swine fever. Now, all of this material, the presentations, and the links of the tools that we have been showing you are also in the chat. We'll also get that to you, to your emails, in the webinar registration page. And it's also with our social networks. It's voluntary. If you want all of this material, just register and we will send it out to you. Dr. Nell and Eric, we're going to start our question and answer session. I can see various questions in our chat. So let's see how we address this. We have some questions about biosecurity. Eric, you can also add your answers if you would like. So we're going to begin. The question is, many slaughterhouses throw blood and their viscera to water, and water can become contaminated with the virus. And this is a practice in Latin America, in Central America, especially in handmade slaughterhouses or handcrafted slaughterhouses. Any questions or any comment on that? Dr. Nell, first. About viscera and carcasses being thrown out into the river at homemade slaughterhouses. Okay, the next question. It says, what would be the main recommendations for biosecurity for raising backyard farm animals, medium and smaller scale farm animals or production animals in Latin American countries, especially smaller countries? Dr. Null?
Great, thank you for the question. Yeah, regarding backyard, I think one of the most important things will be to prevent that contact between the own pigs and wild animals, wild boars, wild pig species. So probably one of the first things that I would think about is try to make sure that there's a decent fence. A lot of people emphasize to have maybe even a double fence, so no physical connection is there, because for African swine fever, but for most people, most diseases, as mentioned, the most efficient way of transmitting diseases through direct contact. So that should be priority number one, in my opinion.
Muchas gracias por su respuesta.
Okay, thanks for your question. Eric, I'm not sure if you would like to add. Let me know. Okay, but turn on your mic, please.
Yeah, regarding as this type of small farm, backyard farming in the developing countries, obviously it's very complicated, as I mentioned while explaining about swill feedings. So it's always a case of avoiding introduction of the virus, and obviously if you've got this free-ranging pigs all around the farm, so if you keep that in a context where you've got nobody coming from external region around your farms, it can work. But once you've got either tourists, because we are also in a region with lots of tourism, so either tourists or you've got also other colleagues, other farmers that are coming to visit you. And this is where the level of risk will increase dramatically, particularly, and this is something that has been seen in some cases where of African swine fever outbreaks. You've got mortality in your farms, and then the neighbors are coming to visit to see, oh, what's happening here. Or the same, you know about mortality in another farm, and you will go there and you won't take any precaution, and you come back to, and this is where you introduce in your farm the virus. Or if you go in another farm, this is where you will yourself spread the virus. So this is very, very complicated cases, this free-ranging pigs and the backyard pig farming in developing country. And it has really to be seen when you've got villages having this type of things, this type of farming, not as different farms, but the whole village should be seen as one epidemiological unit, as such, as a village, not doing distinction between the farms, because all these animals are being in contact with each other. So this is where you can perhaps avoid also introduction. If you look at the village level and you say, okay, let's try to fix the biosecurity at the village level, avoiding introduction of pigs from other villages, and also looking at avoiding people from other places come visiting your village, particularly in case of outbreaks in your country. So you can perhaps, but it's very, very complicated, and that's why the control of the disease is really, once it's in your country, it's very complicated. You can see what is happening in Europe currently, what is happening since many years in Southern Africa. So yeah, it's not an easy task, and I think if we have got here colleagues from Dominican Republic, they could confirm that once the virus has been introduced in your country, and you got lots of this free ranging or backyard farming, it's really a question of avoiding animal movements at regional levels, avoiding completely this movement of animals and movement of even of people. So you are not free to travel anymore between infected region and region free of the disease, and this is a way of avoiding the spread, but it's not an easy task.
Gracias, doctora Nell, y gracias, Eric.
Okay, Dr. Nell and Dr. Eric, thank you for your answers. The next question is the following. How do you make sure that biosecurity measures are in place with grazing animals, with grazing pigs? I guess free-range pigs.
Well, making sure that biosecurity is in place, I think that's number one problem, of course. I think that's where the emphasis that I put in my presentation for follow-up is an important part. You cannot be sure unless you have maybe a national system that is covering or veterinarians that are checking it. Yeah, regarding free range, I mean, I think it is important, although I totally agree with what Eric just mentioned, that it is a complex situation. And once the disease is in your country, it's difficult to get rid of. I think it is important to emphasize that whatever you can do to prevent spread, even when it's already in your country, or just to prevent it from coming in, that's already a massive thing to do. So it's not that with free range, there's nothing you can do to prevent the spread or the introduction. It will be a bit more difficult than, for example, industrial pig production, typically in my country, for example, that's completely inside. So it is more difficult with outside access, but it's not impossible to improve biosecurity. For example, the things that Eric just mentioned, keeping visitors out at all costs, that's something that you can easily implement, whether it's free range or not. Just the part where indeed your animals are having outside access, it's more difficult, and you should prevent that your animals have access with any type of wild animal, birds, pigs, or whatsoever.
And just to add to what Neil just explained, I just wanted to take two examples. The first one is the example of Spain, with the first incursion of ASF in the 60s, end of the 60s. And if you look at what Spain did, they put a very high focus on controlling the disease during many years. And we know that part of Spain have free-ranging pigs. You know, this very good ham that you can get from Spain. They are coming from these black free-ranging pigs from the south of Spain, and so it's a way of production. So you can't you can't forbid these people of producing the pigs that way, and so it took Spain more than 30 years to get rid of the disease. They get rid of the disease in 1996, And so it was almost 30 years during which they tried to control the disease. So it was very complicated, particularly because of this specific context of free-ranging pigs. And the other example is the one mentioned by Neil during her presentation, is the example of Sardinia. Sardinia also get infected during the 60s with the first introduction of ASF in Europe, and they never get rid of the disease. In fact, in 2007, when the ASF was newly introduced in Georgia, there were still ASF virus in Sardinia. And why didn't they get rid of the disease? It's because they try to propose some management or mitigation measures to the population, and particularly they say that free-ranging pig was forbidden, and it has never been accepted by the population because once again it was a way of living, the way of having their pigs always free-ranging and even mating with wild boars in the forest, and they couldn't get rid of it because the mitigation measure was not socially accepted. So this is something to keep in, that if you want to have the disease, you want to control it, and you take some decision, the acceptability also of this decision is very important regarding your population. And the example of Sardinia is really highlighting us with this consideration that free-ranging in some cases it's not something that you can just say no, it's forbidden, because it's a way people are living, and it's also in the case of Spain also a way of producing a very high quality of pork, and therefore you should try to really work closely with the farmers and preferably develop some participative actions in order to control the disease.
Muchas gracias, doctora Nel. Doctor Eric.
Thank you both for your question. The next question has to do with the BioCheck tool. It says, I would like to know if this tool has an application for small producers or backyard producers, and how precise can it be for these types of producers or farmers?
So thank you for the question. Yeah, I didn't emphasize that part, but at the moment we have our survey for intensive pig production, but not yet for outdoor access or backyard. We know that, yeah, that's a downside of the system, that it was developed here in Europe, and that we used our normal situation as the basis. But since the last couple of years, we have been working on establishing surveys which include the specifics of outdoor access, backyard. So it is in the planning and it's on being developed, but we don't have it yet. But for sure, we are planning to have one. For poultry, it will be launched later next year, but for pigs, we're still working hard on that at the moment. But we're definitely trying to get that ready for a lot of you people as soon as possible.
Muchas gracias, doctora. La siguiente pregunta.
Thank you, doctor. The next question. What do you recommend for cases where the only source of food available for pigs is swill food? If that's the only source of food available.
Yeah, I think the only suggestion, or maybe the one that I can come up with right now, is to have to limit the ASF by thoroughly heating the food source. So by thoroughly heating up, I think above 60 degrees Celsius, I'm not sure if everyone is using that same currency, but by heating it for a high enough temperature for a couple of, I'm thinking I've read a study over like 15, 30 minutes, and then it should have eliminated most ASF virus particles. So in case that's the only type of feed available, then that would be my answer, to thoroughly heat all feed that will be given to the pigs.
Yes, I completely agree with Neil, and just to be sure, because it's not easy for farmers to calculate the heat or the temperature of the liquid. Just tell them you boil the swills during half an hour, and then you will get rid of the virus. Very simple things. Boiling 30 minutes, you can use them, and don't keep them also a long time, because then if you've got your pigs that can access the non-boiling, the one that are not boiled, this is where the problems come. So just once you introduce the swills, just directly boil them during 30 minutes.
Por acá nos preguntan.
Okay, we're being asked, can birds be carriers of ASF, and can they develop the disease? Birds.
That I'm kind of looking at Eric. From what I know, I'm not, maybe they could carry it, but I don't think they will ever get sick of it. Eric?
Sorry, because I'm listening Erika in Spanish, and I didn't get the question correctly, so I just split to translation. So can you repeat the question, Erika? I just jumped.
Sí, nos preguntan.
We're being asked. He has to repeat the question. Can birds be carriers of of ASF, and develop the disease itself?
Okay, thanks. No, birds can't be infected by ASF virus, but they can act as mechanical vectors. So meaning, just like when you are traveling with your boots and carrying infected materials, it's the same with the birds. The legs of the birds could also carry a little bit of infected ground, and this is where you can introduce the virus in the farms. That's why they said just try to avoid the introduction of birds, cats, dogs, in farm, not because these animals can get infected, but they can act as mechanical vectors. And it's the same, I don't know if there is a question, but it's the same with the flies. So we know that the flies have been, particularly it's the stomachs flies, the fly that can eat blood of the pigs. These flies, they can transmit the virus, not because there is an internal cycle and the virus being absorbed and then going in the salivary glands of the flies. No, it's just because they can get the virus on their buccal appendices, and they can just transmit it by going from one infected pig to another one straight. So it's a mechanical transmission. It's not as a vector.
Gracias, doctora. Gracias, Eric.
Okay, thank you both for your answers. Definitely, all of these questions are questions that we think about that need to be asked, because everyone has to be crystal clear about their doubts. That's what this webinar is for. So there is no wrong answer. Wrong question. There's another question. It's about biocheck, Dr. Nell. It says if the country does not have enough farms on the biocheck system to establish a national average, how can the farm be evaluated? With global averages or with country averages, countries with a similar zoonotic health status as the farm itself that's being assessed?
Okay, thanks for the question. Indeed, in the past or still today, the way of comparing would indeed be with a worldwide average. But we know, of course, that it's not always the best representation, because indeed you will start maybe comparing a small scale farm to a bigger farm. So that's why we have a solution today and a solution coming later, hopefully in about 1 year. A first solution is that nowadays we also offer what we call an advanced user account on our website. So that's actually a kind of paying customer. So instead of only having access to all the surveys and the reports, people can pay a small amount of money and have like a subscription, a yearly subscription, and then they can make their own comparisons. So then you will be able to compare with other farms from your country. So that's one option. And also, as we speak, we are, well, not yet applying, we're preparing an application for a new project where we'll also try to make surveys which take into account, for example, the size of the farm, the specific risks that you encounter in your country. We will try to combine those kind of parameters so you can, again, make more make different comparisons depending on your needs. So that's something that we're working on at the moment, but it's not available yet.
Muchas gracias, doctora Nel.
Okay,
Doctora,
thank you, Dr. Nell. Doctor, I can imagine that this question is aimed at the biocheck, or is for the biocheck tool. It says, the visual graphs at the end, can they show the results of the farm with global averages?
I'm not sure about the visualization. I am probably, the question is regarding the spider plots. So it includes both the own farm and the world average. And whenever there is a country average, it will compare with the one from the country. I'm hoping that's answering the question.
gracias. Por acá nos preguntan, ¿sabe si alguna de estas herramientas es utilizada por las autoridades competentes de los países para evaluar los sistemas nacionales de un socio comercial? Y si es así, ¿qué países? Me imagino que en
You
este
know that,
caso,
okay, Doctor, is a system, if it's used by the national let me just ask the question again, 1 second.
Sí, claro.
I'm sorry.
Dice,
Okay, the question is as follows. Do you know if any of these tools is used by the national competent authorities, the official authorities of the countries, to assess the national systems of another commercial partner? And if it is, and if so, what countries conduct that type of practice?
So it's indeed a difficult question. If I understand correctly, question is whether there is national governments use one of the systems, and regarding ours, so regarding...
Perdón, la traducción está repitiéndose en español 2 veces.
I only got that in Spanish, of course, so I'm not sure.
Adelante, doctora.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Sorry. So to answer the question, the biocheck system is the only system that is used on a mandatory basis in Belgium. So actually, since this year, Belgian pig producers need to mandatory do a biosecurity audit, and our own government has chosen our system, which is a very nice thing, of course. And also previously, already for a couple of years, also governments in Ireland and Finland are also using our tool as a national monitoring system.
And regarding the ASF combat tool that I presented, as I mentioned before, I don't think that is something that can be used by any government, because it's really, firstly, it's really dedicated to farmers. And the second one is that it's only addressing the risk of introduction of the virus in the farm and not the spread within the farm. And last but not least, as you've seen, this tool is more as an help, as an introduction to biosecurity for farmers, and perhaps can be used, I would say, by veterinarians or official veterinarians to start discussion with the farmers regarding biosecurity. But it's as explained, and the tool itself make this warning. It does not replace a very in-depth assessment done by professional and discussion between veterinarians and the farmers.
Gracias, doctores, doctora Nel, doctor Eric. Siguiendo con las últimas preguntas.
Thank you, Dr. Nell, Dr. Eric. Now we have the latest questions. And the question is it considered within the risk when we're talking about the propagation of ASF, the risk that can be given out of the farm? That is the question. The risk that the ASF can be propagated out of the farm.
Yeah, so in our case with our biosecurity tool, because it's not specifically designed for ASF, but just in general, by indeed, if you're thinking about measures to prevent the introduction, you're actually kind of already trying to prevent spread to other farms as well. So as that I think is the biggest difference with the system that Eric presented, we include both types of biosecurity. So both spread within a farm, but it also applies to spread between different farms. So it's also included in the areas.
Gracias, doctora Nel. No sé si vas a hacer algún comentario.
Thank you, Dr. Nell. I don't know if you were going to make any additional comment, Eric.
No, thanks. It's just, yeah, as mentioned by Nell, the tool I presented, the one developed by Boehringer, is dedicated to risk of introduction in the farm and not really spread from the farm. But obviously, as the circulation of the virus is following always the same step. By knowing how to avoid to introduce the virus in your farm, you should also be able to understand how to avoid to spread, but the tool is not dedicated to that. You can understand it, but you won't have an assessment.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to be trying to finish now. These are the last two questions. What is your recommendation about the excrement or the liquid excrements of that could carry out the ASF?
Well, I think it's clear that African swine fever can survive for a very long time in the environment, so also in the manure. I'm not an expert whatsoever in a processing of manure, but I'm quite sure that there's also ways of like heating or disinfecting the manure in a way that virus particles are killed in a way as well. But for sure, it would be also always a good idea to have the manure, the slurry removed from the animal facility, of course.
Yeah, I agree with Neil, and I guess that we will have in the follow-up webinars that we are organizing, one which will be probably dedicated to the way to destruct carcasses and the way to when you control the disease, when you are doing some stamping out. So we will probably have some experts explaining us how to deal with fluids that are coming from infected farms. And currently, my only way also of dealing with that would be the same as Neil, probably by heating them is the best option.
Así es. Gracias, doctora Nel, doctor Eric.
That's correct. Thank you, Dr. Nell, Dr. Eric. In the following webinars, the subject of mitigation of ASF and regarding farms and biosafety, we'll talk about this in further webinars, I'm sorry. And then the next question is, can we use the tools of biosafety in all the areas that are agroclimatic, for example, tropical zones, under tropical zones? That is the question.
Yeah, regarding our tool, there's no reason why you could not use them in different climate conditions. With that, well, remark, as I already mentioned, the tool that we've developed was aiming to give a general biosecurity overview. So of course, depending on your location, it could be that, for example, insects, things like that, are becoming more important for the diseases that are endemic or in your country. So that's the only remark that I want to make. So you can for sure use it, but you always have to apply results and measures to your specific situation. As mentioned, the problem with ticks or flies, it's something that we don't really have here in Europe at the moment. But of course, in climates with a higher temperature, this will become of a higher importance.
Yes, indeed. These tools have to be used with a very good knowledge of your own environment in your territories or country. So you should replace the answer to the tools in your own environment. Obviously, if you don't have, for example, this presence of soft ticks that are known to be able to transport the disease. So it is not something that you need to take care of as the example of the flies presented by Neil. So you know very well your context, your local context, having also a certain knowledge of the herd in the country and the different types of herd, and obviously the ASF situation of your country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nell, Dr. Eric. Definitely, Dr. Nell, we do face an issue, a problem with flies. So this is very often here in America and in the Caribbean. So this is how we end our question and answer section for today. I want to thank you, both of you, for your excellent participation. And Dr. Nell, we're going to continue to be in touch with you because I am sure that we will have a lot of questions in the way. And we would like to be able to provide everyone with the links so that everyone can access these tools. And I'm pretty sure that there were going to be a lot of questions, the same for you, Eric. So on behalf of all this group, of all of this webinar that we are having right now, and many participants, on behalf of IICA and all the other people that have been cooperating in the elaboration of these webinars, I want to thank you both. Thank you to all the participants that are with us today. And we will see you for the next webinars. We have one more webinar left of this subject of risk analysis. And the following one, the next one, is going to be on December 14th. We changed that date. Okay, it was supposed to be for the 7th, but it has been moved forward for the 14th. Okay, so don't miss that. We're going to have the participation of OIRSA, where we're going to have the results of the study of risk analysis that it undertook for the region of the OIRSA country member countries. And we're going to have the result of the FAO and the study of risk analysis that it did for the region. So please don't miss that. This is the last webinar of this series of risk analysis. And thank you very much for your participation, and we will be looking forward to see you next time. We will deliver the material to your emails. So thank you so much, Dr. Nell. Thank you very much, Dr. Eric. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Bye. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Recording